Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the space where we say, I can sleep. I hope all of you are having a great August so far, and August is usually the time where school starts back up. So let me know which one of you are starting school, and what grade level are you in? Are you taking your school photos right now? And I ask that because I have just started a new job as a school photographer, so who knows, maybe you'll run into me if you happen to be in the same city, of course, or not. But I've been getting a lot of hours, I've been making some money, so I am pretty happy about that. Being back in high school, especially the ones in my area, really brought back some nostalgic feelings because I have not been back onto a high school campus, let alone the ones in my area, which seems so familiar to me. It's been so long. Wow. And just being in like the cafeteria, gymnasiums, it just really felt like I was back in 2015, which I am the class of 2015, which means I am coming up to my 10-year reunion. Oh my god, I'm getting old. Jesus Christ. But enough reminiscing. I hope you all are having a great time and taking good care of yourselves, staying hydrated, and hopefully your weather is not as bipolar as mine, because we would be in triple digits temperature like yesterday, and then today we'd be like down 20 degrees, which is insane. Like, make up your mind, Mother Nature. But overall, as per usual, if you are enjoying these readings and would like for me to continue doing these readings, you can show your support by leaving me likes, leaving me comments, sharing my stuff, and following me on my platforms like Spotify at iKenSleep, YouTube at iKenWin, TikTok at iKenWin, and Instagram at officially.iKenWin. Now this is going to be a very long chapter, so for this one, let's begin our ascension into part 1 of Lost Red Pearl, Inadvertently Luring the Red-Eyed. Just then, Fang Xin, who was kneeling behind Shilian, spoke up grimly. His Highness did indeed mention it yesterday. All eyes moved to him, and Fang Xin continued. Recently, His Highness has been putting a lot of thought into the heavenly procession, and yesterday, he suddenly came up with the extraordinary idea of jumping off the tower to simulate celestial descent, without changing anything else in the programming. At the time, His Highness was in the middle of rehearsals and couldn't excuse himself, so he sent Mu Qing to pass on word to the State Preceptor and request the go-ahead. He raised his head, slight anger in his eyes. Mu Qing returned and told His Highness that the State Preceptors had been informed. So His Highness performed today under the impression that he had permission. Who knew that the State Preceptor was never told and that we almost ruined the event? The cultivators all looked at each other in dismay. The State Preceptor asked, Who knew of this? The 3 Deputy State Preceptors shook their heads, all denying that they knew anything. The State Preceptor turned to Mu Qing, his stormy expression turning into one of indignant anger. Mu Qing, you intentionally withheld this communication? His words and expression showed he already firmly believed that Mu Qing had purposely sabotaged the event. Shilian glanced at the silent, thin youth kneeling on the side and pondered his words before he spoke. State Preceptor, I think there must be some kind of misunderstanding here. Hearing this, Mu Qing slowly looked up, his gaze profoundly dark, but not lingering. Shilian said, If he had purposely held back word, once the event was over and we all compared notes, his deceit would be exposed and there'd be no way he could escape responsibility. Mu Qing is not a short-sighted imbecile, and he wouldn't have come up with such a low tactic. Besides, with the god-pleasing martial warrior missing, what advantage does his demon opponent have? Please hear him out, State Preceptor. and then draw your conclusions. Finishing his speech, Shilian inclined his head. Tell us, Muqing. What happened? Muqing lowered his eyes and said softly, I did pass on what His Highness bade me to say yesterday. The State Preceptor frowned. Wouldn't we know ourselves what you did or did not say? When did you tell us? Yesterday, an hour after the evening lesson, when the 4 State Preceptors were resting at Xishang Palace. This disciple spoke from outside the window, Muqing said. The State Preceptor turned his head to his 3 fellows, looking puzzled. Yesterday, after the evening lessons, what were we doing then? Just as he asked, he remembered, and traces of awkwardness colored his face. The other 3 Deputy State Preceptors also coughed nervously, their responses ambiguous. Nothing really. Just resting is resting. Seeing how the State Preceptor stammered, everyone understood immediately. The Royal Holy Temple was a place of quiet meditation and training, and there was very little entertainment save for small games that could serve as amusement. One of them, the most popular one, was playing cards. Cards could only be played in secret, seen by no one. The State Preceptors had long been bored out of their minds residing at the Royal Holy Temple, so they were heavily addicted. When they started playing, they would forget everything and everyone and fall into a state akin to hysterical obsession or drunkenness. Nothing from the outside world could be heard. If Muqing had told them anything at that time, how could they possibly hear? One of the Deputy State Preceptors said, maybe there were too many people. Your voice was too quiet, and we didn't hear clearly. Yeah, we didn't hear clearly. The State Preceptor, on the other hand, was doubtful. Did you actually go to the Xisheng Palace yesterday? I absolutely did, Muqing said, and as proof, he relayed without fault the dress, look, and accent of the guard standing at the door. The State Preceptor had to believe him, but still he frowned. If you had gone to Xishang Palace, you could have just passed on the message to the trainee outside the door or entered the chamber and spoken to us in detail. Why speak outside by the window? You didn't even confirm whether we heard. Muqing responded softly. This disciple tried. This disciple spoke politely to the Xishang guarding the door, but for some reason that Xishang had to make things difficult and wouldn't let me into the chamber or pass on word for me. He mocked me and drove me away. After a pause, he continued. This disciple had no other choice, so I went around to the other side of Xishang Palace and tried to pass on the message through the window. After I spoke, I heard one of the State Preceptors say, I get it. Now leave. So this disciple took that as consent to His Highness's plans and returned. The State Preceptors pursed their lips and didn't speak. At the height of a round of cards, who would pay attention to whatever was said outside? If they heard anything, of course they'd respond offhandedly with, I get it. But they probably didn't even know where the voice came from. Shilian knitted his brows. That such a thing would happen. Which trainee was that impudent? He's got guts to be so disrespectful to one of my messengers. Although Shilian was usually friendly and rarely put on airs when interacting with others at the Royal Holy Temple, he was still nonetheless the esteemed son of the king, the prominent crown prince. Even as he knelt before the statue of a god, he had not shown any humility. So with the sudden turn to sternness, he was authoritative without needing fury. Everyone fell quiet, and the State Preceptors wore unreadable expressions on their faces. Why didn't you report this to me when you returned yesterday? Shilian asked. Muqing turned around while still kneeling and prostrated, his voice quiet. Your Highness, there's no need to look further into the matter with that Xizhong. I didn't say anything after returning yesterday, simply because I don't want to make this into a big deal. In any case, it's nothing major. If your highness was to defend me openly, it would hurt the camaraderie between everyone. Xilian disagreed, sounding upset. What camaraderie are you talking about? The kind of camaraderie that's used to abuse others? Hearing this, the state preceptor sitting on the side looked even more agitated. At the end of the day, something like this happened because the state preceptors disliked mooching. When they were displeased, the trainee attendants naturally followed their lead, not to mention that mooching himself simply wasn't very likable. So not only did fellow trainees avoid helping him, they went out of their way to make things difficult for him at every turn. Of course, their high and mighty disciple wasn't trying to ridicule them on purpose, but he certainly did take a jab. Mooching was continuously making concessions in his story, but Fang Xin couldn't listen for another minute and suddenly interjected. It really was nothing major, but you had to go and make it complicated. If you had told the trainee at the door that you came to deliver a message at His Highness's command, would he still have the gall to block your way? Also, right before we departed today, the state preceptor asked you where His Highness went. Why did you answer so vaguely? Could you not have said clearly that His Highness was on top of the tower waiting for the procession to start? Mooching immediately argued back, calm and steady. I thought the state preceptor already knew and didn't expect to be asked that question. So I was confused. But right after, I told the state preceptor that His Highness had already said not to worry, that the procession could start without delay as planned, and that His Highness would be back promptly. His Highness might not have been there at the time, but there were many at the scene who heard me. So how can you say I did this intentionally? Or that I was being vague? Fang Xin stared at him angrily. But if he thought about it carefully, mooching did in fact say it all. Mooching did in fact say all that. The problem was that the state preceptor was too anxious and didn't want to make hasty decisions. If he was going to pick at faults, there really wasn't enough evidence to prove anything. Just then, Xilian spoke up again. All right. It was all just an untimely mistake, a misunderstanding. Let's count it as bad luck. So stop fighting. Fang Xin looked extremely displeased, but mindful of his position, he dared not be clamorous in the Palace of Divine Might and stopped talking. The state preceptor didn't want to pursue this topic anymore either. After all, if they must get to the heart of the topic, wasn't he at fault too for being too engrossed in card games? Thus, he simply waved and sighed. Let's talk about that later, and we shall put our heads together and think of a way to see how the situation can be salvaged. The three of you are dismissed. Go remove your costumes and do whatever else you must. Xilian bowed and rose to his feet immediately. Fang Xin and Mooching both properly kowtowed once before rising, following Xilian, who was about to leave. Xilian had one foot over the threshold when he heard the state preceptor speak up again. Your Highness? Xilian turned his head. Both His Majesty the King and Her Ladyship the Queen asked after you today. If you have time in the next few days, go and see them, the state preceptor said. Xilian grinned. This disciple understands. After leaving the Palace of Divine Might, the three of them traversed a large portion of the summit and returned to the training hall built especially for the Crown Prince, the Palace of Shenle. There, Xilian could finally remove his ceremonial garb. As mentioned before, for the Shangyun Heavenly Ceremonial Procession, the ceremonial attire of the God-pleasing martial warrior was exceedingly strict in every detail. Each accessory and fold had meaning and could never be mismanaged. For example, the outer robe was white, symbolizing divine purity. The inner robes were red, symbolizing canonical tradition. The golden crown that fastened the hair symbolized imperial power and wealth. And the white plumes, folded away by the heart, symbolized the flight to ascension. Loose corded ribbons along the sleeves symbolized his duties to carry the common people, and so on and so on. It was easy to imagine that, from head to toe, both wearing and removing it was no simple task. However, as the esteemed crown prince, naturally he needn't do anything himself. He only had to stand and open his arms wide in that refreshing, fragrant chamber and chat with Feng Shen while he waited for his personal attendant Mu Qing to help him remove layer after layer of the God-pleasing costume. The outer white robe of the God-pleasing costume was of high quality. The pattern of the thread was exquisite and detailed, and the fringes were sewn with intricate light golden patterns, elegant but not frivolous. In comparison, the black martial gi of the demon costume was like the difference between heaven and earth. Mu Qing himself hadn't removed his black gear yet, his hands full with the God-pleasing costume he had removed from Shilian. His fingers twitched, imperceptibly stroking the material of that white robe. Next to him, Shilian removed the golden crown, letting his long hair loose as he sat down on the edge of his sandalwood bed. He kicked off his snow-white boots and waited for someone to bring him fresh clothes. He waited for a bit, but noticed that Mu Qing wasn't moving, so he tilted his head. He asked, "What's wrong?" Mu Qing quickly snapped out of it and replied, "The costume seems dirty in some places." Shilian hummed thoughtfully and said, Bring it over and let me see." Sure enough, the snow-white attire was marked by two distinct little black handprints. Shilian took a look and remarked, "They're probably from that little kid who fell from the sky. He was grabbing on to me and wouldn't let go. The child's face was wrapped in bandages, so maybe he had taken a tumble elsewhere or something. Feng Shen, did you check him out?" Feng Shen was just wrapping up the sword and long saber used during the God-pleasing performance, and he replied gloomily, "No. I took him out of the palace and was about to take a look at his face, as you asked, but he kicked me in the shin. It actually fucking hurt." Shilian fell over on the bed laughing, pointing at him. "It must be because you're so mean. Otherwise, why didn't he kick me, but did kick you?" "I wasn't mean," Feng Shen cried. That damn kid ran away so quick. It was like he was possessed by the devil or something. If he hadn't, I would have picked him up upside down and shook until he cried from fright." Mu Qing turned the white robe over in his hands. "I hope that kid isn't a beggar. He's so dirty. A simple grab left black prints like these. Your Highness, the God-pleasing costume can't be dirty. Isn't that another bad omen?" Shilian stayed lying on the bed, and he casually grabbed the book from the headboard and used it to cover half of his face. 3 times around the capital. My good name's already going down in history with that incredible record. If it's dirty, it's dirty. Just wash it. After a pause, Mu Qing replied quietly, "I will do my best to be careful when I wash it." Shilian flipped through the book and came to a page illustrating the art of the saber, and he remembered the vigorous sparring earlier that day on stage. He smiled. "Mu Qing, you fought well on stage today." Mu Qing's shoulders stiffened. Shilian continued, "It was only today that I discovered you're much more skilled with the saber than you are with the sword." Mu Qing's face relaxed, and he turned around. There was even a little smile playing on his lips. Really? Yeah, Xilian answered. But you might have been too hasty. Swinging a saber isn't like swinging a sword. Look here. The moment the topic shifted to martial arts, Xilian became highly enthusiastic. Even more possessed than the state preceptors playing cards. He jumped off the bed without even putting on shoes, demonstrating his point on the spot using his hand as an imaginary saber. Muqing wore a complicated expression, but after Xilian demonstrated a few moves, he started to watch seriously. Fang Xin, on the other hand, swung the now properly wrapped long saber and chased Xilian back onto the bed with it, scolding as he did so. If you're going to show off, at least put on your shoes before you do. You're the crown prince. Hair loose and feet bare. What a disgrace. Xilian was just at the height of his excitement when he got chased onto the bed like a duck to a pen. He sulked. All right, jeez, he said and ran both hands through his long hair, ready to tie it up before continuing his lecture to Muqing. Suddenly he frowned. That's weird. What is it? Fang Xin asked. Xilian pulled at his earlobes. One of the earrings is gone. The people of Shenle believed that the pinnacle of Taoist cultivation was the harmony of yin and yang, the unity of male and female. The forms of the gods were inexhaustibly changing and naturally unbound by gender restrictions, shifting male or female as they willed, and that belief was woven into the design of the god-pleasing costume. Throughout history, every god-pleasing martial warrior was adorned in accessories that possessed the form and details of both sexes, earrings, bracelets, and so on. When Xilian was preparing for the role, he pierced his ears and put on a pair of earrings. They were a pair of magnificent, deep red coral pearls that gleamed resplendently, lustrous, and smooth and extremely rare. However, when Xilian was combing his hair just now, only one of the red coral pearls from the pair was left. The moment he said it was lost, Muqing's relaxed expression froze again, but the other two did not notice at all. Fang Xin looked all over the chamber first, inside and out, and returned empty-handed. You're so scatterbrained that you even lose things worn on your ears. I didn't see it in the palace of Shenle, so I'll go out and search the roads. It better not have gotten lost during the parade. Xilian was puzzled too, but he also didn't care that much. Maybe, but if it did, then there's no way you'll find it. If it's lost, it's lost. Muqing, however, brought out the broom he usually used to sweep. He said quietly, That pearl is too precious. We should at least try to look for it. Maybe it rode under the bed or a shelf. He then started sweeping, and Xilian responded. Why don't we call for a few more hands to help? Crowds get handsy. We don't want anyone sneaking it in their pockets before we find anything, Fang Xin said offhandedly. Muqing was quietly checking under the bed, but when he heard Fang Xin's words, his face momentarily turned a shade of deathly white. He shot to his feet, and the broom in his hand snapped in two, with a crack. Xilian was startled. Ever since they left the Palace of Divine Might, Fang Xin had been filled with complaints about Muqing, but he never let any of them loose. Now that he saw Muqing blow up first, he got angry too. What are you doing, breaking things so suddenly? Who pissed you off now? Muqing replied coldly. Why don't you tell me straight what you really want to say, instead of casting shadows where there are none? I have nothing to do with the lost pearl. Fang Xin had always been a straightforward individual, and this was the first time he heard someone accuse him of casting shadows where there were none. He laughed from sheer anger. Why don't you tell that to yourself? What did I say? I didn't say you stole it. But you got all flustered. What, feeling guilty? Shilian broke out of a shock and sat up on the bed, crying, "Oh no," in his head. Fangxin, that's enough. A few veins popped on Muqing's forehead. Fangxin really didn't think much of it and asked in confusion. What? It really wasn't the right time for Shilian to explain, so he could only try to pacify Muqing. Don't misunderstand. Fangxin was just making offhand comments. He wasn't targeting you. Muqing clenched his fists tight, then released them, and at last took control of his temper. However, his eyes were growing red, and he turned to Shilian, enunciating each word as he stared at him. You don't keep your promises. No, you're wrong, Shilian cried. Muqing closed his mouth and took a few breaths, then cast a furious stink eye at Fangxin. Without another word, he dashed out the door. Shilian jumped off the bed and was about to give chase, but he was yanked to a stop mid-step. Your Highness, you haven't even put on shoes. It'd be a disgrace to go out with your hair down and in such a mess. Help me stop him, Shilian ordered. At least put on your shoes first and tie your hair, Fangxin said. And leave him be. He's always moody like this. Who knows what nerve we touched to make him go mental out of the blue? Muqing was long gone by then, and Shilian knew he wouldn't be able to catch up anyway. Instead, he grabbed for a hair tie to fasten his hair in a rush. He sighed as he did so. He wasn't going mental. You just said the wrong thing by accident. Fangxin grabbed Shilian's usual white training garb out of the closet and threw it at him. What did I say wrong? Shilian replied as he slipped on his boots. I can't tell you. Either way, come with me to find him and tell him it was all a misunderstanding, that you weren't accusing him of anything. Fangxin frowned. Why can't you tell me? Shilian's lips were sealed tight. Fangxin was growing more suspicious and thought back at Muqing's furious expression just now. He spoke up suddenly. He didn't actually steal from you before, did he? Shilian immediately made a vigorous, shushing gesture with his hand. No, no! Seeing him like this, Fangxin was even more sure. So that's it. No wonder his face changed so drastically. It's because I touched a raw nerve. When did he steal? Not so loud, Shilian hushed, anxiously. Fangxin hushed his voice. Something like that happened and you didn't tell me? Tell me now! Since Fangxin was already suspicious, Shilian figured if he kept lying, it would come out either way. He had to woefully relent. It doesn't really count as stealing. But... Shilian sighed. I'll start from the beginning. Do you remember 2 years ago when I first entered the Royal Holy Temple? There was a time when I lost a leaf of gold foil. Hearing this, Fangxin's eyes widened and he slapped his thigh. It was then? 3 years ago, Shilian begged and pestered in all manner of ways until his parents finally relented and allowed him to enter the Royal Holy Temple for training before the age of 20. A year later, when construction was completed on the Palace of Shenle, Shilian jubilantly entered the mountain. When Shilian first moved in, the amount of luggage he brought personally wasn't particularly large. He had only 2 carriages full of books and 200 treasured swords. But the queen loved her son dearly and was afraid that the ascetic life would be too quiet and austere. So later she ordered 20 servants and 4 large carriages full of the crown prince's most beloved trinkets to be sent to Mount Taikang. It was an impressive, dramatic sight as those caravans drove up the mountain. Included in this care package was a set of 108 leaves that made up a golden foil palace. Building a palace out of gold foil was a popular game enjoyed by the Shenle nobility. At the time, so much luxury appearing on the palace caused a small wave of complaints. The Royal Holy Temple consisted of serious cultivators who weren't that familiar with the prince's character just yet. And although they couldn't say much publicly, there was much grumbling behind his back. Did His Highness the Crown Prince come to train or to play? Could this son of the royal family cultivate if he only came for the fun of it? When Fang Xin heard those complaints, he had a mind to dispute them, but Xilian told him not to worry about it with a smile. It's only natural they should think that way. They'll know soon enough that I'm not here to play games. And they'll also know soon enough that among us is the true number 1 in this generation of trainees. However, not long after, there was an incident. Xilian was trying to send back as many of the 4 large carriages and servants from the queen as possible, but when he was going through the inventory, he found that in the pack of 108 leaves of gold foil, 1 was missing. That set of gold foil sheets had been packed in the carriages, and once at Mount Taikang, it had never left the palace of Shenle. If it wasn't lost on the road, then it had been stolen. Nothing was found on the road, so Xilian brought it up offhand to the state preceptor. Assuming it had been stolen, the state preceptor was enraged that someone within the Royal Holy Temple would commit the crime of robbery under the allure of golden foil. He was determined to recover the golden leaf at all cost, and if it should be found on anyone, the punishment would be severe to the utmost. Thus, the over 3,000 disciples of Mount Taikang were caught completely off guard when they had to drop what they were doing to be forced into teams to search room after room, chamber after chamber of every single training hall. It was a huge rigmarole that exhausted everyone. Yet unexpectedly, halfway through the search, Xilian abruptly changed his tune and apologized for causing everyone trouble and said he suddenly remembered that he had already lost a leaf from that set of gold foil while he was still at the Imperial Palace. There should only be 107 leaves total after all. To investigate the whereabouts of the missing gold foil that night, the Royal Holy Temple went through a great deal of pain and was thrown into total confusion. So, when His Highness the Crown Prince suddenly announced that they should forget the whole thing, when everyone was sweating with exhaustion, it was inevitable that many of the other disciples felt aggrieved. Thus, for the longest time afterward, there was talk behind his back, things like, "Well, he's the Crown Prince, so he gets to call the shots. And hopefully next time, his memory will be better and he'll remember the important things before calling for an investigation," and so on. Fang Xin was furious listening to it, but Xilian still told him not to mind it and to quietly give it time. Sure enough, after that, Xilian crushed all 3,000 disciples completely and proved that he fully deserved the title number 1 of the Royal Holy Temple. And because he was genuinely friendly and didn't rely on his background, his reputation gradually improved amongst his peers. Fang Xin wasn't one to remember the petty details, so he had forgotten this had happened. Now that it was brought up again, it dawned on him, and he was both shocked and angry. "It was Mu Qing who walked away with that gold foil? Shh!" Xilian hushed him and looked around to make sure no one was around. That gold foil leaf fell out of the rattling carriage while coming up the mountain. Mu Qing was passing by while carrying water and found it in the bushes. He kept it under his bed and hadn't figured out what to do with it. But that very night, the state preceptor suddenly struck, ushering everyone out to search their rooms. I didn't know him at the time, just saw an errand boy who looked distraught. Later, while I was sitting outside, he came up to serve me tea and admitted everything. That's how I found out. Taking without telling is stealing. So you helped them bury the whole incident and told everyone that gold foil was lost in the Imperial Palace? While they were talking, Shilian had finished dressing and headed out the door. That's how it is. Fang Xin was going to die from rage. He followed after Shilian. Your Highness, do you know just how many people talked about you behind your back when you first came to the Royal Holy Temple? Keep it down, Fang Xin said. He really did look quite distraught at the time, pale as a ghost. People here at the Royal Holy Temple already dislike him, so if I had said anything, his life here would be over. Our places in life are different, and we stand at different vantage points in this matter. The consequences can't be compared. Just then, a few young trainees approached them and gave courteous bows, their faces full of smiles while greeting them. Your Highness! Shilian answered back with his own matching smile, and the two parties brushed past each other. He said to Fang Xin, See? I told you to give it time. Now I get along with everyone, and who dare say anything bad about me? The two of them entered Mu Qing's bedchamber, but didn't see a soul, so they left to keep searching. I already thought it strange at the time, since I hadn't heard that you'd lost any leaves at the palace, Fang Xin said. But I can't believe you didn't tell me about this for 2 years. You even told me that you met him while he was sweeping. He asked me later not to tell anyone, Shilian said. I agreed, so of course I didn't tell. So of course I wouldn't tell. Not even you. Since you know now, that means I went back on my word. But you mustn't tell anyone else. How does that even count as going back on your word? Fang Xin said. It's not like you told me anything. It's his own guilty conscience making him freak out that gave him away. No. You promise me right now that this stops here. Otherwise, I'll break up my relationship with you and you'll be cursed to never find a wife. Shilian threatened. Fang Xin snorted dismissively. You, break up with me. The day after our breakup, everyone in the kingdom of Shenle will know one thing. His Highness the Crown Prince fainted from tying his sock strings too tight while dressing. Fine. I won't say a word. Who gives a fuck about gossip anyway? After a pause, he still decided to comment. I bet he thinks I'm always picking on him because I know about this gold foil business. But really, I just don't like people like him. A grown man overthinking so much of this and that. He must have suspected you told me a long time ago. Not even concubines in a harem have minds as convoluted as his. It's so annoying. He's not as bad as you make it sound, Shilian said. The Royal Holy Temple had never lost anything before, meaning this was the first time he took something. And at the end of the day, it was for his mother. Well, anyway, he already swore that he would never do it again. So giving him another chance wasn't wrong. And he kept his word. Besides, when that little kid fell today, if Mu Qing hadn't cooperated with me, the parade wouldn't have ended so smoothly. Fang Xin clicked his tongue. You're already going down in history for only making it 3 rounds around the capital, so of course he won't vex you further. Your Highness, I'm telling you, I don't believe a word he said at the Palace of Divine Might. Who here in the Royal Holy Temple doesn't know that when the State Preceptor plays cards, he hears and sees no one? He had to pick that time to pass on the message and stubbornly refused to clarify under whose orders he was sent. It's like he was purposely trying to strew things up. Shilian shook his head and said gravely, To be honest, I may have been thoughtless in regard to this. I know mooching is disliked, so I originally wanted him to run more errands for me. I thought that if I let people know he's my personal assistant, they'd be nicer to him. But I didn't realize they were already so nasty. Not only did nothing get done, he got bullied too. If you think about it from another angle, you'll find his moodiness understandable. Fang Xin disagreed wholeheartedly. Why are you blaming yourself for his moodiness? You're the crown prince. How did you end up owing anyone anything for showing them favor? Your Highness, I really don't understand why you think so highly of him. Shilian grinned. Fang Xin, did you know? There are so many people in this world that are nothing but rocks in my eyes. Fang Xin didn't understand. Shilian walked with his hands clasped behind his back. There are rocks everywhere, but precious jades are hard to come by. When it comes to martial arts, I've only ever seen two people who could be called jades. One is you, the other is him. He suddenly stopped and turned his head, eyes bright. I genuinely think that mooching is extremely gifted. How could I let such a precious jade be left to collect dust? Denied from showing its true beauty? Denied from showing its beauty simply because of its background and temper? Shilian looked determined. No, I think that's wrong. You ask why I think so highly of him? It's the same reason I think so highly of you. Those who are destined to shine, I must let them shine. Besides, I don't believe that goodwill brings bad returns. To be continued.